Hello everyone. This is my presentation on Dr. Sharon Smaldino. I read several papers by Dr. Smaldino. We have also used the textbook that she authored in one of our classes, and she also wrote some chapters in some of the other books that we've used in some classes. After doing this research on her, I was very impressed by her. She has given a lot to this field. Her work is very impressive. She's very impressive. She's very inspirational. So let's get started. We're going to talk about her background and biography. We're going to look at some of her work that she's contributed to the field. Her major theory that she has contributed, which is the Assure model, and the impact that she's had in the field of instructional technology and instructional design. Okay, looking at her background, Dr. Sharon Smaldino is a pioneer in the field of instructional technology. She grew up wanting to become an architect. In the 1960s, she went to college. It was not considered acceptable for a woman to be an architect, so her mom told her that she needed to either be a teacher or a nurse. So she went and became a speech pathologist. She got a degree in education and speech pathology. She began working with deaf adolescents, and as she was doing that, that's what kind of sparked her interest in how to use different methods to reach students. So when she was working with these deaf students, she realized that they didn't have the access to the materials that hearing students had, and she was trying to figure out a way that they could interact with the material and be just as engaged as their peers that did not have hearing issue. So she went on to get a master's degree. Then she went on to get a doctorate. She got a doctorate and she started working at the University of Northern Iowa in the teacher preparation department. She continues to work in a teacher preparation department today at Northern Illinois University. Looking at Dr. Smaldino's resume is about 10 pages long. She is a member of so many organizations. She's received countless awards over the years for her work, her research. Just a very accomplished person, very impressive. So she's been very involved in AECT, an organization that we've discussed extensively since the 1980s. She even served as president of AECT from 2003 to 2005. She's still a member of the board of directors. She was also the editor-in-chief of the Tech Trends Journal, which is published by AECT from 2006 to 2009. She's co-authored 10 books, being one of the prominent authors on these 2 books and then authoring some chapters in the other books. So her 2 major publications are Teaching and Learning at a Distance, which we have used in this program, and Instructional Technology and Media for Learning, which is in its 12th edition right now, I believe. So that has been revised several times, as well as Teaching and Learning at a Distance, which is in its 5th or 6th edition. She's also authored more than 50 articles. She speaks nationally and internationally, presenting on topics of instructional technology, instructional design, and distance education. She's also served on the board of directors for the International Visual Literacy Association and the Educational Communications and Technology Foundation. She's won several grants, including Preparing Tomorrow's Teachers to Use Technology grant and the Teacher Quality Enhancement grant. So just a little timeline about Dr. Smaldino. She got her bachelor's degree in 1968 in speech-language pathology from State University of New York. That's when she began working with the students that were hearing impaired. She later went on in 1972 to get a Master of Arts in Elementary Education from the University of Connecticut. In 1987 is when she graduated with her doctorate in educational media from Southern Illinois University. She then went on to become an assistant professor at the University of Northern Iowa in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, the Teacher Preparation Department. She went on from 1996 to 2003 as a professor, so she went from assistant professor to a professor at Northern Iowa. In 2003, she became an interim associate dean at the University of Northern Iowa. Again, in 2003 to 2005, she was president of AECT. From 2003 to present, she is the L.D. and Ruth G. Morgridge Endowed Chair at Northern Illinois University. So she still currently works at Northern Illinois University in the Teacher Preparation Department. 2006 to 2009, she was editor of the Tech Trends Journal. In 2008, she won the IVLA James G. Soucy Distinguished Service Award. So, looking at her work in regards to instructional technology and instructional design, her primary focus has been instructional design. She's been in the field for more than 2 decades. She spent much of her career researching how technology can best be integrated into the classroom. She's also well regarded on the topic of distance education. Her contributions have provided significant guidance and support in the field, not just through her speaking engagements, her books, her articles, her leadership in the various organizations, but through the teacher preparation department that she's worked in for years. She's teaching the next teachers, and she's explaining these things to them. She's teaching them about instructional design and distance education and how to look at the learner and all the things that she focuses on. So here's just a short clip of an interview that AECT did with her called The Legends of AECT, Legacies and Legends. So they're asking her about her primary focus of her work.
What is your primary focus of your work?
I have 2 venues I'm really interested in, but my primary responsibility right now tends to be in teacher education and looking at what we're doing in terms of preparation of educators, in terms of looking at how we're integrating or bringing the technology into the schools in ways in which we're changing education, hopefully, changing the way in which teachers are interacting, not only with the technology, but interacting with the children and the learning, and trying to see how the technology can be used in unique and really basically innovative ways.
Is that your primary area of research focus as well?
That and my other area is looking at online learning or distance education. I'm really looking at how it is we go about structuring the learning environment. And I'm really right now focusing in on some of those decision processes that we go through as instructor designers. And what are some of the things that we're choosing to do as we design, and because we can do a variety of different kinds of things, how are we making these decisions to make these design decisions to implement online learning?
All right, so one of her primary focuses has been on learner analysis. She speaks a lot on learner analysis and has several articles that address this subject. She believes that student interest is of utmost importance in the instructional design process. She has a quote saying, "If instructional media and technology are to be used effectively, there must be a match between the characteristics of the learner and the content of the methods, media, and materials." She also has discussed that the general learner characteristics, which include age, grade level, job, socioeconomic, culture, etc., and specific entry competencies or prior knowledge and learning styles must be analyzed in order to make method and media decisions. So this video is taken from a speaking engagement that she did in Turkey this year at the IETC conference, and she's discussing learner analysis.
So, I contend, in my mind, that the critical component to any design principle, and wherever you start, you must always keep the learner in mind. Thank you for giving me that. I'll give you the money later. The idea that your learners are coming to you because there is something that you offer, whether it's in the form of a MOOC and a large body of people coming together to learn some component of a larger scope of a topic, or whether it's coming to you as an individual because you are the master of that subject. They're coming to you to learn. Who are your learners, and what aspect of the 21st century are they in? And where are you in the context of that 21st century? So if that's true, going back and thinking about the students you prefer, who are your students? Are they the ones you prefer? Or are you kind of getting some that you really wish you didn't have in class? We all have a few in our classes. We go, oh, why did I get this one in my class? You know, we all have a few who come in knowing more than we do, knowing a whole lot less than they need to know in order to be able to achieve those competencies. We have a whole lot of students who bring biases and attitudes with them. They don't want to be in a class with someone who's got gray hair. A few of us in this room have gray hair. Or they don't want to be in a class with someone who doesn't dress appropriately as a professor, because they don't like the casualness of the individual. So we have to think about who they are and what are they bringing with them. And we need to think about the things that they need to be doing within the context of those objectives, those standards, the competencies that they need to be achieving by the end of this course or by the end of this program of study. We need to be thinking about it in the context of all of the issues that you raised, including your instructional strategies. I teach this way. You need to think about how they're going to adjust or how they're going to fit into those kinds of things. My research has begun to focus on the learners. It's always sort of been focused on the learners, but my research has really started to focus on them thinking about themselves as learners. And that's a very difficult thing for adults to do. Adult learners have difficulty stopping and thinking, not so much what I learned today, but what did I think about? How did I process this information? Where does this fit into my larger schema of what I know and what I want to know? And also, how does this attach to my own goals, my learning goals, my personal goals, my professional goals? How does what I just experienced move me forward? And that's a very difficult question to ask learners because, for one thing, nobody's ever asked them before. Or very few people ask them. And when they ask them, they let them get away with, I would like to say, shallow answers. Well, I learned A, and I learned B, and I learned C. And that's going to help me as a professional because I can do A now, and I can think about doing B, and I'll learn more about C, and I'll go ahead and do that. That's sort of on a surface. How did they fundamentally change themselves as learners, is my question. And how did they take that learning experience and help them evolve into deep thinking, critical, not necessarily of you, the instructor, or me, the instructor, but critical in the sense of looking at the knowledge, looking at the skills, looking at the kinds of expectations that are expected for the profession, for themselves within the class, within the whole program, looking at this critically, determining what it is that they should be doing, what they need to be doing.
Okay, so that was just a little bit of her speaking about her focus on learner analysis, and I think that goes just to instructional design in general, whether it's in technology or not. As teachers, we're always trying to push our students to that deeper level, that critical understanding. And we're always trying to get our students to think deeply about the questions that we ask and not just give those shallow answers. So I think what she was talking about there, she was talking about adults, but adults, younger children, whatever, that just speaks right to understanding our students and designing instruction where they can really get that deep understanding. So she's also done a lot of research with distance learning. She's published many articles and she's presented many times on this subject. She's considered an expert in the field of distance learning. In her book, Teaching and Learning at a Distance, she discusses the characteristics of distance education. She said that distance education is a dramatic idea. It may change, even restructure education, but only if it is possible to make the experience of the distant learner as complete, satisfying, and acceptable as the experience of the local learning. So that goes back to what we talked about in our last class about equality, that distance education is not necessarily better than face-to-face, but it should be equal. In the article Instructional Design for Distance Education, she discusses the design process, and she says that the planning and organization for a distance education course is multifaceted and must occur well in advance of the scheduled instruction. I think we would all agree with that when we were making our modules in our last class, it took a considerable amount of work, actually in the last two classes, when we made modules. So for me, it definitely took more thought to make an asynchronous course than it did in my face-to-face courses that I teach every day. She talked about in the beginning of her career in media how she was like the first person in her family to have a modem, and she was teaching teachers, pre-service teachers, how to use an overhead projector. So she's been in the trenches with media for a long time. She talked about staying flexible because the technology is always changing. She talked about the time that it takes to create a well-rounded distance education course, and those things have to be properly looked at. She talked about how in the beginning distance education was kind of just talking heads, so people basically just doing the dump of whatever they did face-to-face, they're just dumping it into some kind of media without any thought to, does that work in that form? So the major theory that she's contributed is the Assure model. The Assure model is based on Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So the A stands for analyzing the learner, which we've kind of already touched on. But she says that Assure starts with looking at the learner in detail. Nothing you plan or design is effective unless you have taken the time to look at the learners. By understanding where the learners are at the start of instruction, a teacher will make every effort to assist all learners to be successful in their learning endeavors. I feel that knowing as much as possible about your learners is critical to design and implementation of instruction. Analyzing learners should include general characteristics such as age, gender, interest, as well as prior knowledge and learning style. The first S stands for stating the objectives. Dr. Smaldino says no instruction should begin without everyone having a clear understanding of what is supposed to happen in the instruction. This does not preclude the possibility of additional learning taking place, but without a roadmap, some of your learners may well be lost, and especially in the schools today as we edge closer to the 100% of students meeting or exceeding expectations. I believe that students need to know what is expected of them. I do believe that there is more than one right way to achieve those expectations, and more than one right medium to use, because it's not one size fits all. But as No Child Left Behind is still a mandate, we need to find ways to make it possible for our diverse learning population to fit into the mold that has been outlined for us. Learners need to know what they are to do. I just love that whole quote. Every single thing she said in it, I agree 100%. The second S is to select the media and the methods and the materials. So this is the time for the planning to bridge between the learner and the outcomes. So this is where you're planning your activities, you're figuring out what media is going to be meaningful to the learning and not just used for the sake of using. The U stands for utilizing those media and materials. So once we determine what they are, then we're going to utilize them using the 5 P's. The first P is preview the materials, making sure they're appropriate. The second P is preparing the materials, make sure everything is working before you start your instruction. I've had that problem before. The third P is to prepare the environment, and the fourth P is to prepare the learners by letting them know the objectives and explaining how they will be evaluated and what the relevance is of the instruction. The R is to require learner participation. So the instructor should explain to the student how they will interact with the materials and the content. The instructor will build in activities which allow the student to practice what they are learning and construct meaning. And feedback is essential at this point before evaluation. And then the E is to evaluate and revise. And Dr. Smaldino says, my final area of importance in the design and implementation process to assure good learning is the reflection component of evaluation. Once you have completed the design and instruction and gathered the data about the outcomes and impressions from your learners, you need to take the time to consider what went well and what could be changed. This information will help you redesign the instructional event for future opportunities. But the information also guides you on how to better address your learners in instruction beyond this particular instructional event. We often do not put enough emphasis on reflection as teachers and designers, but I do consider that it is not time wasted. All right, looking at some future research, in that speech that she made at the IETC conference, she spoke about how her focus is on the learners. She's moving towards having the learners think about themselves as learners. So she posed some questions. How do learners fundamentally change themselves through our instruction? How do learners think deeply and critically about what they have learned and what they will do with the information? Do we ask our students what their goals are for instruction? This is kind of an extension of her previous research in learner analysis, but I believe that she will continue just to focus on solid design principles, pushing the learners to deeper levels of understanding. So here's a short clip where she discusses her research.
My interest is in designing instruction and looking at how we put instruction together to make sure that students have the outcomes, the learning outcomes that we want them to have. But what I try very hard to do is to get people to think about not doing it the way we've traditionally done teaching, which is traditionally tell people things and then expect them to take it out and do it. But rather my interest is in working with the people, the students, as they're learning the information and guiding them so that when they actually do go to try to apply it in their daily lives, in their work, that they've already had an opportunity to practice it with me or with the instructor. So I'm not looking at telling students anything, I'm looking at how to help them learn to do something that they then can take and apply.
So I just love what she said there, talking about thinking outside the box, just continuing to push her students to a deeper level of critical thinking is great. So finally, I found Dr. Smaldino to be very inspirational. She's very influential in this field. I would love to meet her one day. I was very impressed in my research of her ideas, the fact that she's 69 years old. She's still so excited. If you watch these videos, she's very excited about learning new tools, inspiring teachers to think outside of the box. She's very highly accomplished. She pushed through the glass ceiling for women, I think, in this field, and just not even in this field, just in general as a professional woman in that time period, pursuing a career that people told her was not a career for women, but she did it. She's been very successful. I think that teachers can learn so much from her about not getting stuck in outdated thinking and being open to change for the benefit of our students. And at that IETC conference, she was doing a question and answer session, and somebody said, you know, what do you tell teachers who don't want to move into the 21st century, who don't want to look into media and technology and how that can be used to design great instruction for students? And her answer was change or retire. So I think that's awesome. We know lots of people who that quote would apply to. So I just loved her. I thought she was great, and you would all do well to research her more on your own.